Lions attack, baby elephant. Then, giant creatures rise from the jungle. Dust exploded, a choking ochre cloud kicked up by desperate scrabbling feet. A high-pitched scream, thin and reedy, tore through the late afternoon heat, instantly swallowed by a guttural rumbling growl that promised violence. Tawny blurs, low-slung and rippling with muscle, converged on a small gray shape struggling frantically amidst the chaos. Claws flashed, seeking purchase on thick, wrinkled hide. Teeth, long and wickedly sharp, snapped shut inches from a wildly flailing trunk. The air thrummed with panic, the acrid scent of fear mixing with the dry smell of the parched savanna grass. This was ambush, swift and brutal, unfolding under the unforgiving African sun. The small gray form, impossibly vulnerable, stumbled its legs, buckling under the onslaught. One attacker lunged, landing heavily on its back claws, digging deep. Another darted in, aiming for the vulnerable underbelly. Defeat seemed not just inevitable, but imminent. The terrified squeals intensified a soundtrack to a primal nightmare. To witness how this terrifying encounter unfolds and discover the astonishing truth behind the sudden turn of events, stay tuned. And if you find yourself captivated by the raw power of nature and the resilience of its creatures, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting that notification bell. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we share. The world had narrowed to this terrifying vortex of dust, snarls, and pain. For the small creature at the center, there was only the overwhelming presence of the attackers, their hot breath, the weight pressing down the sharp stabs of pain. Its frantic cries were a beacon of distress in the vast emptiness of the plains. Where was the warmth, the comforting bulk, the low rumble that meant safety? Gone, replaced by a terrifying immediacy. A fight for breath, for footing, for life itself. The attackers pressed their advantage, a coordinated dance of death honed by generations of predatory instinct. They were a terrifying trinity of hunger and power, closing in for the final fatal move. The savanna held its breath. The distant shimmer of heat waves the only movement beyond the deadly struggle. Then something shifted, not visually at first, but seismically. A low thrumming felt more than heard, vibrated up through the dry earth, unsettling the dust motes, dancing in the air. It started subtly, a deep bass note beneath the cacophony of the attack, easily missed amidst the snarls and screams. But it grew, gaining resonance, transforming from a tremor into a palpable vibration. The ground itself seemed to hum with a gathering power, an ancient energy awakening. The growls of the attackers faltered for a microsecond, their ears twitching, heads lifting slightly. What was that sound? It wasn't the wind, nor the panicked flight of distant prey. It was something else, something vast, something approaching. The air thickened, charged with an unseen force, and from the dense, shadowy line of the jungle fringe, a sound unlike any other began to swell. A deep, earth-shattering roar that wasn't a roar, but a trumpet call of impending colossal fury. The hook was set, the question screamed silently. What was coming? And would it arrive in time? To understand the terrifying immediacy of that ambush, one must rewind slightly to perhaps half an hour, before the dust choked the air and the screams began. The setting was the vast, sun-drenched expanse of the African savanna, a landscape stretching towards the horizon under a sky bleached pale by the afternoon heat. Termite mounds rose like ancient sentinels from the golden grasses, and solitary acacia trees dotted the landscape, their thorny branches offering scant shade. Life here pulsed with a rhythm dictated by the sun, the rain, and the eternal dance between hunter and hunted. Moving slowly across this immense stage was a family, a multi-generational unit, bound by ties stronger than blood. An elephant herd, they traveled with a ponderous grace, their large bodies swaying gently trunks, occasionally reaching down to pluck tufts of grass or test the wind for scent. There were grandmothers with skin like cracked riverbeds, young bulls testing their nascent strength, watchful mothers and aunts forming a protective cordon around the newest members. Among them, radiating the boundless energy and curiosity of youth, was Tembo. Tembo, barely a few months old, was a whirlwind of clumsy enthusiasm contained within a small, wrinkly gray package. His trunk, still learning its complex coordination, swung wildly as he investigated everything. Interesting smells in the dust, the texture of dry leaves, the way sunlight dappled through his mother's legs. His mother, a large cow named Mala, kept a patient eye on him, her presence a constant source of comfort and security. The herd moved towards the edge of the dense jungle that bordered the plains, seeking the shade and water promised within its depths. As the day waned, the pace was unhurried, governed by the matriarch, a venerable cow whose wisdom and experience guided their path. It was during this slow procession, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the herd and the warmth of the afternoon, that Tembo's curiosity became his undoing. A butterfly, a jewel-toned marvel with wings like stained glass, flitted past his nose. It danced on the air currents, a vibrant splash of color against the muted tones of the savanna. For Tembo, it was an irresistible invitation, forgetting his mother's nearness, forgetting the cardinal rule of staying within the protective circle of the herd. He gave chase. A few playful steps turned into a short, lumbering pursuit, taking him further and further away from Mala's comforting presence. He was only a dozen meters away, perhaps 15, but in the vastness of the savanna, it was a gulf. He wasn't the only one who noticed the butterfly, or rather, the small, vulnerable elephant calf, distracted by it, hidden deep within a thicket of brittle, sun-bleached bushes. Golden eyes watched with unnerving stillness. A lion pride led by 3 experienced huntresses had been tracking the elephant herd for hours. They were lean, hungry, and masters of patience. They knew attacking the main herd was folly, a suicidal endeavor against such overwhelming power and numbers, but a stray calf, that was a different proposition entirely. The lead lioness, marked by a faded scar across her muzzle, had watched Tembo's movements, had seen the growing distance between him and his mother. A low, almost inaudible chuff communicated the opportunity to her sisters. Their muscles tensed, coiled springs ready to unleash. The inciting incident, the catalyst for the terror that would shortly erupt, was not a grand decision or a malicious act, but simply a moment of youthful distraction. Tembo, captivated by the ephemeral beauty of a butterfly, took those few fateful steps away from safety. As the butterfly fluttered higher and out of reach, Tembo stopped, suddenly aware of the space around him, the silence where his mother's reassuring rumbles should have been. He turned, a flicker of uncertainty in his young eyes. It was in that precise moment of isolation, that brief window of vulnerability, that the lions chose to strike. The rustle in the dry grass wasn't the wind. It was the sound of impending doom, the launch of an attack that transformed the peaceful afternoon into a desperate struggle for survival, setting the stage for the shocking events witnessed in the opening moments. The context was set. Innocents strayed and predators seized their chance. The attack, when it came, was devastatingly swift. 3 tawny streaks exploded from the bush, covering the distance to Tembo in a blur of lethal grace. The element of surprise was total. Tembo, barely registering the danger before it was upon him, let out that first piercing shriek of pure terror. His instinct screamed, "Run, run," towards the towering gray shape of Mala, his mother, his sanctuary. He stumbled, his short legs churning frantically in the loose soil, trying to gain purchase, trying to orient himself towards the herd. But the lions were professionals. The lead huntress, the scarred one, didn't go for the kill immediately. Instead, she shot past Tembo, cutting off his escape route back towards the main group. Her powerful body slammed into his flank, not hard enough to knock him down completely, but enough to send him staggering sideways, disoriented, and further isolated. Simultaneously, the other 2 lionesses attacked from the sides. One lunged, claws extended, aiming for his hindquarters, trying to hamstring him to immobilize the surprisingly strong legs. The third went low, snapping at his trunk as he instinctively tried to curl it away for protection. Tembo, though small and inexperienced, possessed the innate resilience of his kind. Fear warred with a desperate instinct to survive. He swung his head, trying to use his sheer weight, meager though it was compared to his attackers, as a weapon. He trumpeted again, a desperate plea for help that seemed to echo unanswered across the plains. He kicked out with his back legs, managing to connect glancingly with one of the lionesses, earning a sharp snarl of annoyance. Dust billowed around them, kicked up by the frantic dance of attack and defense. It coated Tembo's hide, stung his eyes, and filled his nostrils with the scent of dry earth and predator. Meanwhile, Mala had heard her calf's first scream. A jolt went through her massive frame. Her head snapped up, ears fanning out, pinpointing the direction of the sound with terrifying accuracy. A deep, guttural rumble of distress and fury tore from her throat, a sound that momentarily silenced the birds in the distant trees. She surged forward, abandoning the slow pace of the herd, her immense body suddenly charged with adrenaline. But the distance, short as it seemed just moments ago, now felt like an impassable chasm. Furthermore, the lions were cunning. While the 3 females focused on Tembo, a large male lion with a scruffy mane materialized from another patch of cover, positioning himself strategically, not attacking Mala directly, but presenting a clear, formidable obstacle, a silent warning that getting involved would have consequences. His presence, combined with the sheer speed of the unfolding attack on Tembo, created a buffer zone of danger that even a frantic mother hesitated for a split second to cross. Other members of the herd reacted instantly to Mala's distress call and Tembo's continued screams. A wave of agitation rippled through the group. Heads lifted, trunks raised, testing the air. Low, anxious rumbles passed between them. A complex communication network activating. The matriarch, instantly assessing the situation, let out a commanding trumpet blast, not of panic, but of mobilization. The herd began to turn their leisurely procession, abandoned, their focus shifting entirely towards the unfolding crisis. Their movement, however, was hampered by their sheer size and the need to maintain cohesion, especially with other young calves needing protection. They were coming, but it felt agonizingly slow. Back in the vortex of the attack, the lions were pressing their advantage relentlessly. The scarred lioness, seeing Tembo tiring, made her move. With a powerful surge, she launched herself onto his back, her claws digging deep into the thick hide for purchase. Tembo staggered violently under the weight, his front legs buckling. He cried out again, a sound choked with dust and despair. The lioness clamped her jaws around the base of his neck, seeking the killing bite. The other two closed in, sensing the end was near. One raked her claws down his flank, leaving shallow bleeding scratches. The other snapped again at his legs, trying to bring him down completely. Tembo felt his strength failing. The weight on his back was immense, suffocating. The pain from the claws was sharp and constant, his vision blurred with dust and exhaustion. He could hear the roaring breaths of the lions, feel their heat. Was this it? Was this the end of his short, curious life? He made one last, desperate effort, twisting and bucking, trying to dislodge the crushing weight. He managed to shake the lioness slightly, forcing her to readjust her grip, delaying the fatal bite by precious seconds. It was during these critical seconds that the ground began to vibrate more intensely. The low thrumming escalated into a distinct, rhythmic pounding like giant drum beats approaching at speed. The air crackled with static energy. The distant trumpeting wasn't distant anymore. It was closer, louder, imbued with a terrifying, focused rage. The lions felt it too. The one on Tembo's back momentarily loosened her grip, her head, lifting eyes, flicking towards the jungle edge. The male lion, who had been acting as a blocker, let out a low growl, not of aggression, but of unease. The odds which had seemed so overwhelmingly in their favor just moments before were beginning to shift in a dramatic and terrifying way. The tension stretched taut, the fate of Tembo hanging precariously in the balance as the sound of the approaching giants grew into an earth-shaking crescendo. The rising action had peaked, the complications were deadly, and the turning point was about to crash onto the scene. The world exploded in sound and motion. It wasn't just a few elephants responding, it was the herd emerging from the shadowy threshold of the jungle. They were not the slow, ponderous creatures of moments before. They were a force of nature, unleashed a living avalanche of gray power and righteous fury. The ground shuddered under their synchronized charge, the pounding of their massive feet creating a seismic rhythm that drowned out all other sounds. Dust clouds billowed outwards from their advance, obscuring the lower halves of their legs, making them appear as if they were floating an unstoppable tide surging across the savanna. Leading the charge was the matriarch, her immense head held high, her trunk raised like a banner, emitting a series of deafening, high-pitched trumpet blasts that ripped through the air, echoing off the distant hills. Flanking her were Mala, her eyes fixed on her struggling calf with frantic intensity, and several large bulls, their tusks gleaming wickedly in the afternoon sun, their ears flared wide like giant battle shields. Their eyes, usually placid, now burned with a cold, collective rage. They weren't just running. They were thundering a unified wall of muscle bone and unwavering resolve aimed directly at the lions tormenting Tembo. The sheer spectacle was terrifying. The speed, the power, the noise, the terrifying harmony of their anger. The very air seemed to vibrate with their collective intent. The effect on the lions was instantaneous and absolute. The scarred lioness, still clinging precariously to Tembo's back, felt the ground shake violently beneath her prey. She saw the approaching wave of gray behemoths, heard the ear-splitting trumpeting, and instinct, pure primal survival instinct, screamed danger. The calculated predatory focus shattered, replaced by stark terror. She scrambled off Tembo's back, landing awkwardly, momentarily losing her footing in the churned-up dust. The other two lionesses who had been closing in for the kill froze mid-movement. Their confident aggression evaporated like mist in the sun. They stared eyes wide at the oncoming juggernaut. The male lion who had postured so confidently moments before uttered a choked growl and took an involuntary step backward. There was no calculation now, no assessment of risk versus reward. There was only the overwhelming reality of imminent crushing destruction. Facing one angry elephant was dangerous. Facing an entire enraged herd was suicide. This was the turning point. The narrative flipped entirely. The hunters became the hunted, or rather the desperately fleeing. The power dynamic shifted completely and irrevocably. The brief moment of predatory dominance was utterly broken, replaced by the terrifying prospect of being trampled, gored, or swatted aside by creatures whose size and collective power dwarfed their own. There was no coordinated signal to retreat, just a simultaneous panicked recognition of overwhelming odds. The scarred lioness, recovering her balance, didn't even glance back at Tembo. She bolted, weaving through the scattered thorn bushes, heading for the thickest cover she could find. Her sisters were right behind her, their sleek bodies stretched low to the ground as they ran for their lives. The male lion, abandoning any pretense of bravery, turned tail and sprinted, his mane flowing behind him, disappearing into the tall grass with astonishing speed. The elephants didn't break stride. Their charge carried them past the spot where Tembo stood, trembling, their momentum aimed at driving the threat far, far away. A couple of the younger bulls peeled off slightly, trumpeting aggressively towards the retreating shapes of the lions, ensuring their flight was complete and hasty. The main body of the herd, however, swept onwards for a short distance, a demonstration of force before their pace began to slow. The air, moments before filled with the sounds of attack and panicked flight, now resonated with the deep, rumbling communications of the elephants, the thudding of their slowing footsteps, and the shuddering breaths of exertion and relief. The lions had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only disturbed dust and the lingering scent of fear. Tembo, miraculously still on his feet, watched them go, his small body shaking uncontrollably. Then the colossal, comforting shapes of his family began to converge around him. The turning point was complete. The immediate danger had passed, thanks to the awe-inspiring, perfectly timed intervention of the giant creatures rising from the jungle. The game had changed, and Tembo, against all odds, was still in it. This was the point of no return for the lions' hunt. Their chance was gone, shattered by the unbreakable power of the elephant herd. The immediate, thunderous fury of the charge subsided, replaced by an atmosphere thick with concern and lingering adrenaline. The savannah, which had momentarily transformed into a battleground, began to settle back into a semblance of uneasy calm, though the air still vibrated with the aftermath of the confrontation. The lions were gone. Fleeting glimpses of tawny fur disappearing into the distant scrub confirmed their hasty retreat, but the elephants remained their immense forms, creating a bastion of safety on the open plain. The herd didn't immediately relax. Their first priority was the source of the crisis. Tembo Mala reached him first, her massive legs covering the final distance in surprisingly quick strides. She didn't make loud noises. Instead, deep, resonant rumbles vibrated from her chest, sounds of profound relief and anxiety. Mingling, her trunk an instrument of incredible sensitivity and dexterity. immediately began a thorough examination of her calf. Gently, methodically, it swept over his small, trembling body, probing the areas where the lions had attacked. She lingered over the scratches on his flank, her trunk tip soft as velvet, checking their depth. She carefully examined the base of his neck, where the lead lioness had clamped her jaws, searching for puncture wounds. Her own body radiated warmth and the familiar comforting scent that was Tembo's entire world. Tembo, overwhelmed by the terror of the attack and the subsequent relief of rescue, pressed himself hard against his mother's sturdy leg, seeking refuge in her immense presence. He let out small, whimpering chirps, the elephantine equivalent of a child's sob. Mela responded by wrapping her trunk gently around his shoulders, pulling him even closer, murmuring those deep, soothing rumbles that spoke of safety. Regained, the rest of the herd formed a protective circle around mother and calf. It wasn't a panicked huddle, but a calm, deliberate formation. The matriarch stood slightly outwards, her gaze sweeping the savanna, ears still fanned slightly, listening intently, ensuring the predators weren't regrouping or lingering nearby. The large bulls positioned themselves on the perimeter, facing outwards, solid gray sentinels presenting an impenetrable wall. Other cows and younger elephants filled the gaps, their trunks occasionally reaching out to touch Mala or Tembo, offering silent reassurance and solidarity. It was a powerful display of communal care, a living fortress built of family bonds. The air hummed with their low-frequency communications rumbles, passing back and forth, too deep for human ears to fully decipher, yet clearly conveying complex information assessment of the remaining threat, confirmation of Tembo's condition, reassurance rippling through the group. They remained stationary for several long minutes, allowing Tembo's trembling to subside, allowing Mala to complete her inspection, and allowing the collective adrenaline levels to decrease. The focus shifted from outward aggression towards the lions to inward care and consolidation. Tembo's injuries thankfully appeared superficial. The lioness's bite had not broken the skin significantly due to the thickness of his young hide and the timely interruption. The scratches were shallow, already beginning to clot in the dry air. The psychological trauma, however, was evident in his continued closeness to Mala and his wide, watchful eyes. He had learned a harsh lesson about the dangers lurking just beyond the safety of the herd, a lesson etched into his memory by fear and pain. The matriarch, satisfied that the immediate danger had passed and that Tembo was not seriously harmed, eventually gave a low, decisive rumble. It was the signal to move on. Staying exposed on the open plains for too long, especially after such an incident, was not wise. The shade and security of the nearby jungle beckoned. The formation shifted fluidly, transforming from a defensive circle into a traveling column. Mala nudged Tembo gently forward, with her trunk keeping him tucked securely between her front legs and the flank of a large auntie. He was now enveloped, cushioned by the protective bulk of the adults, shielded from the outside world. As they began to move, their pace was slower, now more deliberate, imbued with a heightened sense of caution. Trunks swept the ground more frequently, testing the air constantly. Every rustle in the grass, every distant shadow was noted and assessed. The playful curiosity that had led Tembo astray was replaced, at least for now, by a subdued awareness of the savanna's inherent dangers. The attack had served as a brutal but effective teacher. The sun dipped lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. Long shadows stretched across the grasslands. In the distance, perhaps, watching from the safety of a rocky outcrop, the lions might have observed the herd's departure. Defeated hungry, they would have to seek easier prey elsewhere. Their gamble had failed, thwarted by the unbreakable unity and formidable power of the elephant family. The herd moved towards the darkening line of trees, a cohesive unit, a testament to social bonds forged over millennia. The tension of the near-fatal encounter was slowly dissipating, replaced by the steady rhythm of their journey. They were heading towards safety, towards water, towards the night's rest. The emotional peak of the rescue itself was passing, building towards the final resolution of this dramatic episode in their lives. The climax wasn't a final battle, but the quiet, powerful affirmation of survival and the enduring strength found within the herd. The stage was set for the final moments of relief and the return to their established rhythm, forever marked by the memory of the lion's attack and the giant's response. The true climax of the encounter wasn't the frantic charge or the lion's terrified flight, but the moments that followed within the sanctuary of the protective circle. It peaked in the quiet intensity of Mala's final assessment of her calf. After the initial frantic check, her trunk moved with painstaking slowness. A final verification, she nudged him gently, encouraging him to take a few steps. Tembo, still shaky but no longer trembling, violently walked alongside her, leaning into her comforting bulk. He lifted his trunk towards her mouth in a gesture of reassurance and dependency. Mala responded with a soft rumble, a sound of profound maternal love and relief that seemed to resonate physically within the immediate circle. She looked up, meeting the matriarch's calm, steady gaze across the small space. A silent communication passed between them, an understanding that the calf was whole, the danger had passed, the crisis was over. The matriarch dipped her head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement. This was the moment, the central question. Would Tembo survive the vicious attack? Was definitively answered. Yes, bruised, terrified, but alive and fundamentally unharmed thanks to the herd's intervention. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the gathered elephants. Muscles that had been tense with readiness began to relax, ears that had been flared in aggression softened slightly. The air charged moments before with potential violence now settled into a palpable calm. The matriarch then turned her immense body, shifting deliberately towards the jungle. She emitted another low rumble deeper. This time, a clear signal, move on. There was no further need for aggression, only for continued vigilance and the resumption of their journey toward safety. The emotional peak had been reached and passed. Survival was confirmed, the family unit was intact, and the immediate threat neutralized. The herd, having faced down death and emerged victorious through collective action, prepared to leave the scene of the near tragedy behind them. The climax was the quiet affirmation of life and the power of their bond in the face of mortal danger. The transition from defensive formation to traveling column was seamless, a practiced maneuver executed with innate understanding. Tembo, no longer an isolated individual, but an integral part of the moving fortress, walked nestled deep within the protective cluster of adults. Mala kept her trunk resting lightly on his back, a constant, reassuring touch. He stayed close, the memory of the lion's teeth and claws still fresh, the terrifying feeling of isolation still palpable. The boundless curiosity had been tempered by a harsh dose of reality. The savanna was beautiful, but it demanded respect and constant awareness. As the herd moved steadily towards the cooling shade of the jungle tree line, the setting sun cast their long shadows behind them, stretching back across the plains where the drama had unfolded. The dust raised by the charge and the struggle had settled, leaving only faint tracks in the dry earth, ephemeral evidence of the life and death struggle that had taken place. The savanna reclaimed its silence, broken only by the chirping of insects tuning up for the night and the distant call of a nocturnal bird. The air cooled rapidly as twilight deepened, bringing a measure of relief from the day's intense heat. Reaching the edge of the forest felt like crossing a threshold into another world. The sparse acacia and open grassland gave way to dense undergrowth and the towering canopy of ancient trees. The sounds changed, the light changed, even the air smelled different, richer, damper, filled with the scent of loam and decaying leaves. Here within the embrace of the jungle, the herd felt a deeper sense of security. Their massive forms blended more easily into the shadows, and the dense vegetation offered better cover from potential threats. They found a clearing near a small water source, the sounds of their contented drinking and splashing softly filling the night air. Tembo stayed close to Mala, drinking deeply beside her. Later, as the herd settled for the night, the adults forming a protective ring around the younger members. Tembo lay curled close to his mother's immense warmth. He was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Sleep came quickly under the watchful eyes of his family, guarded by the collective strength that had saved him. His new normal would involve a greater degree of caution, a more profound understanding of his reliance on the herd. The playful straying would likely be curtailed, replaced by a deeper instinct to remain within the sphere of protection. For Mala, the incident reinforced her maternal vigilance. For the herd, it was another affirmation of their successful strategy for survival in a world filled with danger. Unity, communication, and decisive collective action. The lions, somewhere out on the darkening plains, would nurse their wounded pride and empty bellies, reminded of the formidable power of their largest neighbors. The eternal cycle of the savanna would continue. The hunter and the hunted, the moments of terror and the quiet interludes of peace. But for tonight, under the vast star-studded African sky, within the protective embrace of the jungle and the even stronger embrace of his family, Tembo was safe. The giant creatures had risen, and life for one small elephant went on.